It was supposed to be the day humanity proved it belonged. For centuries, Earth had been a small, insignificant speck in a vast, uncaring universe. But now humanity had earned its place. The Interstellar Council, a collection of ancient alien civilizations that ruled over countless worlds, had sent their invitation. It was a dream come true, or so everyone thought. The humans gathered in the grand chamber, a massive hall that stretched out in every direction, filled with strange, shimmering lights and the hum of alien machinery. Around the long table sat representatives from over 50 different species, each one more bizarre than the last. Tall, glowing beings from the Vega system, reptilian creatures from the Arcturus cluster, and even a shape-shifting mass of pure energy from a far-off star. The air was thick with anticipation. To be chosen by the council was an honor. It meant power, protection, and endless resources. It meant that humanity had finally risen from the ashes of their bloody past to join the stars. The council's leader, an elegant creature named Valdrith, a being with translucent skin and 6 eyes, stood before them. He spoke with a voice that echoed like distant thunder, powerful and ancient. "Humanity," he began, "you have struggled, fought, and bled for your place in this universe. Today, you stand at the threshold of a new era. You are no longer children of a dying world. Today, you become part of the great unity of the stars." The humans were silent. They had waited for this moment all their lives. The long war, the battles for survival, the breakthroughs in technology, it had all led to this. Today, they would join the council. The invitation was a sign that their struggle had been worth it. And yet, as they sat there, something didn't feel right. There was a tension in the air, something that gnawed at the back of their minds, a sense of unease that none of them could shake. It was the way the council spoke about unity, as if they were all just pieces of a larger machine to be fit into place without question. General Marcus Hayes, leader of Earth's military forces, sat at the head of the table. His eyes were narrow, his jaw clenched in silent thought. He had seen too much to believe in the easy promises the council made. He had fought in the wars, lost friends in the brutal skirmishes between Earth's factions, and led humanity through its darkest hours. Now, he looked around at the faces of his fellow humans, pilots, engineers, scientists, all of them waiting for the words that would change their lives forever. As Valdrith finished speaking, the moment for action came. The humans were supposed to nod, to agree, to sign the treaty that would bind them to the council. They were supposed to step into the future with their heads held high. But then Hayes stood. The chair scraped against the polished floor with an unsettling screech, silencing the room. He had never been one to follow orders blindly, and this time he wouldn't start. The council's eyes turned toward him, their many gazes fixed on the human general. Hayes didn't flinch. He had come too far to be intimidated by these alien creatures. They had watched humanity for centuries, observing, judging. They had seen the violence, the chaos, the mistakes. But they had also seen the resilience, the will to survive, the refusal to back down. He tossed a thick folder onto the table with a sharp motion. The impact echoed throughout the chamber. "We refuse," he said, his voice clear and cold, cutting through the silence like a blade. A stunned silence followed. The alien delegates exchanged uncertain glances. The speaker, Valdrith, took a cautious step forward. "You refuse?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. "You have been offered the chance to join us, to become part of something greater, a unified force of the galaxy. Your people would be safe, protected." "We don't need your protection," Hayes replied, his eyes never leaving the speaker. "What you offer isn't unity, it's control. You take, you drain, and you rule over species like us. We're not here to serve you, we're here to leave." The room buzzed with confusion and disbelief. The representatives of the council, who had watched humanity from a distance for so long, were suddenly unsure. This wasn't what they expected. It was a bold move, one that none of them had anticipated. How dare these humans refuse the chance to be part of the most powerful alliance in the universe? The council had given them everything: resources, technology, safety. And this was the response they got. One of the alien delegates, a hulking, armored creature from the Rigel system, stood up, his voice low and dangerous. You do not understand what you are rejecting. The universe is vast and you are fragile. Without us, you will be crushed. You will fall. The stars will forget you. The humans exchanged glances, their eyes hardening. We'll take our chances, Hayes said, his voice thick with defiance. We're done bowing to anyone, and we're sure as hell not going to start with you. The speaker's face twisted into something between amusement and anger. You are fools. You have no idea what you're up against. You think you can survive without the council, without us. Yes, Hayes replied simply, we do. For a long moment, the tension in the room was unbearable. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. The entire council chamber seemed to pulse with the gathering energy of the alien ships waiting just outside, their engines thrumming with power. Valdrith took a deep breath, his 6 eyes narrowing. If you leave now, you will be enemies of the council. Your species will be hunted. We will not allow this insolence to stand. Then we'll fight, Hayes said, his voice resolute, his eyes blazing with a fire that even the most ancient species of the galaxy had never seen. Humanity had always been underestimated, and today they would show the universe what happened when you made that mistake. The moment of truth had come, and it wasn't the council that would decide humanity's fate. It was the humans themselves. The tension in the council chamber was suffocating. It hung thick in the air, a cloud of disbelief and anger from the alien delegates. They had never encountered defiance like this. The humans had refused the very thing that countless species across the galaxy would have killed for, a place at the table of the most powerful alliance in existence. General Marcus Hayes stood tall, unmoving, his hands clenched into fists. His heart raced, but his expression remained cold. He wasn't afraid. He knew this moment would come, the moment when humanity would have to decide, join the stars or fight for their independence. Across from him, Valdrith, the Speaker of the Council, stared with 6 unblinking eyes. His voice, usually calm and composed, now cracked with barely controlled fury. You refuse the unity of the galaxy, he said, his voice cold but tinged with disbelief. You reject peace. You refuse safety. You will regret this, General Hayes. You have no idea what you are doing. We've been doing just fine without your safety, Hayes replied, his voice unwavering. The council talks of unity, but all I hear is control. You don't offer protection. You offer subjugation. You are nothing, the Rigelian delegate growled, stepping forward, his massive form towering over the humans. His armor gleamed under the harsh lights of the chamber. Without the council, you are nothing but insects in the grand scheme of the universe. We've heard that before, Hayes muttered under his breath, his eyes never leaving the alien. How many times have we heard that we're nothing? How many times have we been told we'll fail, that we'll fall? Look at us now. We're standing here. You've underestimated us every time. The Rigelian's sharp claws clenched into fists, but before he could retort, another voice broke through the growing tension. A soft, almost melodic hum filled the air. It was Ilaris, a gentle but powerful being from the Andromeda system, who spoke next. She was one of the oldest members of the council, and unlike the others, she was known for her wisdom. Valdrith Rigel, please, Ilaris said, her voice smooth and calm like a soothing balm to the chaos. There is no need for threats. The humans have made their decision. Let us respect it, for now. But they, Valdrith began, his voice laced with anger. No, Ilaris interrupted firmly. This is their right. They are not the first to reject our offer, and they will not be the last. For a moment the room was silent. The tension was still there, thick and heavy. But at least for now, the threat of immediate violence had passed. Valdrith's 6 eyes narrowed in thought, then he gave a sharp nod, clearly not satisfied but resigned to the situation for the moment. Then they will regret this, he said coldly, turning away from the humans as if speaking to himself. Hayes's lips curled into a slight smile. We'll see about that. Outside the chamber, the hum of ships could be heard, the enormous council fleet waiting in orbit just beyond the station's walls. Hayes knew what that meant. The moment the decision was made, the council would show their true face. The aliens had always prided themselves on being the dominant force in the galaxy. To them, this was an insult, and insults in their minds could only be dealt with through force. He could almost hear the orders being given to mobilize the fleets, to prepare for a strike. They would come for humanity, and they would come hard. "Are you ready?" asked Lieutenant Naomi Rios, one of the few humans who understood the weight of this moment. She stood by Hayes's side, her voice steady despite the fear that flickered in her eyes. She had known war. She had seen the horrors it brought, but nothing in her past had prepared her for what they were about to face. "We've been ready," Hayes answered. "This is our moment. We fight for Earth. We fight for our future." "And if we lose?" Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. "If we lose," Hayes said slowly, "we die fighting, and the universe will remember us. They will remember the day humanity said no." The decision had been made. There was no turning back. As the council members left the chamber, muttering among themselves, Hayes turned to his crew, the men and women who had fought beside him, who had shared in the struggles of a species that had no place among the stars until now. He gave them a nod, and they moved with quiet efficiency. There was no fear in their steps, only determination. Every human on that ship knew the stakes. They had already made their mark on history, but now they would make their mark on the galaxy. Outside the station, the battle began. The first wave of alien ships surged forward, their weapons charging, their intentions clear. The Council wasn't just angry. They were livid. The humans would not be allowed to leave unscathed. This insubordination would not stand. But humanity had something the Council didn't understand. The humans fought with a fury that could not be matched. Their ships, though smaller and less advanced, were agile and unpredictable. Earth's fleet moved with a grace that came from desperation, from knowing that the future of their species depended on every move, every shot. General Hayes watched from the command center as the first shots were fired. The Council's ships were powerful, but they were predictable. They relied on overwhelming force and numbers. They didn't expect humans to fight dirty, to use every advantage they had, no matter how small. "I want every ship on the move," Hayes barked. "Use everything we have. There's no turning back." The battle outside was a storm, a violent clash of wills. The Council ships had the firepower, but the humans had the heart. And in the end, that's what made the difference. Humanity wasn't going to bow down. They weren't going to be controlled. This was the beginning, and it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about showing the universe that Earth was no longer a fragile speck in the dark. They were a force to be reckoned with. And they would fight for their freedom. The silence of space was shattered by the roar of laser fire, the deafening explosions, and the shriek of metal tearing apart. Humanity's first battle with the Interstellar Council had begun. It was chaos, the kind of battle that could change the course of history, a battle where no one knew if they would survive. But one thing was certain: humanity would fight with everything they had. Outside the great station, Earth's fleet was already engaged with the massive Council armada. The Council ships, sleek and powerful, charged forward in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready to obliterate the human fleet. But humanity's fleet, though smaller and less advanced in many ways, was unpredictable. They didn't follow the rules the Council had come to expect from every other species. They fought like their very survival depended on it, because it did. General Hayes stood at the heart of the command center aboard the flagship Vanguard, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the battlefield. The ships of Earth darted between larger Council ships, using their speed and agility to dodge incoming fire. The humans had always been good at improvisation, and now they were showing just how powerful their creativity could be. "Focus on the left flank," Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Push them back, use everything we've got." "Yes, sir," came the response from Lieutenant Rios, who was coordinating the movements of the fighter pilots. She didn't hesitate. The pilots had been trained for moments like this, though they had never expected anything this intense. But now, with their backs against the wall, they were more than ready. They had no choice. "Fire!" a voice shouted from another corner of the command center. In an instant, the Vanguard's massive cannons released a barrage of energy beams that lit up the dark expanse of space. One of the Council ships in the lead flinched, its shields flickering under the onslaught. The enemy was strong, but the humans were fighting for more than just their lives. They were fighting for their right to choose their future, to live on their own terms. On the front lines, the human fighter jets streaked through the battlefield like wasps, darting in and out of the massive enemy formations. The smaller ships were built for speed and agility, designed to outmaneuver opponents with sharp turns and sudden bursts of speed. They fired back relentlessly, scoring direct hits on several Council ships, causing them to stumble in mid-flight. But the Council was relentless. They regrouped quickly, forming a tighter formation and unleashing a volley of devastating laser fire. One human fighter exploded in a burst of light, the pilot's scream cut short as his ship was ripped apart. "Push through," Lieutenant Rios shouted into her comms, her hands steady on the controls. "We can do this. Stay on target." Captain Emily Torres, the leader of the human squadron, barked out a response. "We're not backing down. Stay sharp." Her voice was filled with defiance. The fighter pilots weren't just skilled. They were angry. Angry at being underestimated. Angry at being forced into a corner. They had fought tooth and nail for this moment, and now they would make the Council regret thinking they could crush humanity so easily. At the Vanguard, Hayes surveyed the chaos. His ship's shields flared under a barrage of laser fire, but it held. The Vanguard was strong, designed for this kind of fight. The bridge was alive with activity, officers barking orders, systems lighting up with reports from the front. Hayes could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on him. Every decision he made could be the difference between life and death for hundreds, even thousands of humans. "We've got more enemy ships incoming." Rios's voice rang through the comms. The enemy reinforcements were on their way, and the humans were already stretched thin. But there was no time for hesitation. Hayes clenched his jaw and gave the orders. "Launch the backup fighters now." His command was followed in an instant. The backup squadrons, fresh and ready, were released from the hangar bay and shot out into the fray. They were the last line of defense, and Hayes knew that without them, the battle would be lost. The Vanguard shuddered as a massive energy blast struck its hull, but it kept going. There was no stopping now. Every human in this battle knew that this was the moment where they either won their freedom or faced annihilation. On the battlefield, the humans fought back with a fury that surprised even their enemies. The alien ships were large and powerful, but the humans were nimble, using every advantage they could. They used the wreckage of destroyed ships as cover, weaving in and out of the debris, striking with pinpoint accuracy. They took risks. They didn't play by the Council's rules. And it worked. For every alien ship that fell, another human ship took its place. The alien fleet, expecting an easy victory, was now forced to play catch-up, their ships scattered and disorganized. Hayes knew the tides of battle were turning. The Council had thought they could intimidate humanity into submission. They thought humanity would cower before the might of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful empire. But the Council had underestimated the one thing they couldn't control: human willpower. On the Vanguard, Hayes felt the first spark of hope as he saw several Council ships break off, their shields flickering and their weapons going silent. Some of them were retreating, pulling back from the fight. "They're retreating," shouted an officer from the weapons console. "We've got them on the run." But Hayes didn't allow himself to celebrate just yet. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Council had more resources, more firepower, and they would come back with everything they had. But the humans were ready, and this time they wouldn't back down. "We don't stop," Hayes said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. We keep pushing. We show them that humanity doesn't kneel. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. But the Council would soon learn the most important lesson of all. Humanity would never be crushed. They would never bow. They would fight until the very end. The battle raged on, an endless dance of destruction, each moment stretching into eternity. The Vanguard and the rest of Earth's fleet fought with all the ferocity of a species desperate to prove its place in the universe. The Alien Council had underestimated humanity's strength, and now they were beginning to see the consequences. General Hayes stood at the helm of the Vanguard, his face etched with exhaustion but also determination. He could feel the weight of each moment pressing down on him, the weight of every life in his fleet, every soldier who depended on him. The sound of explosions and laser fire echoed through the command center, but Hayes remained focused on the task at hand. He had seen too much to let fear creep in now. There was only the battle, only the fight. "Report," Hayes said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're holding our ground, sir," Lieutenant Rios responded, her voice steady despite the intensity of the battle. "But we've got new enemy reinforcements coming in. They're sending everything they've got now." "Understood," Hayes replied, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the holographic display. The Council wasn't pulling any punches. The reinforcements were massive, a wall of ships closing in on Earth's fighters, determined to crush humanity's defiance once and for all. "Don't let them overwhelm you," Hayes ordered, his voice sharp. "We've fought harder battles than this. We'll push through." The human fleet had been holding its ground for hours, but the alien ships were relentless. The Council's ships were far more advanced, their firepower nearly unmatched. Yet the humans had found a way to survive, by fighting with heart, with everything they had. The aliens had never seen anything like it. "Lieutenant, target their weapons systems," Hayes commanded. "We need to disable their firepower before they overwhelm us." "Aye, sir," Rios responded, quickly relaying the orders to the pilots. "Focus on their energy cores, hit them where it hurts." The fighter pilots, each one a trained warrior, didn't hesitate. They weaved and dodged between the towering alien ships, using their smaller size and speed to their advantage. A group of human fighters swarmed a Council dreadnought, aiming for the weak spots in its shield and disabling its forward weapon systems. Another squadron fired concentrated blasts into the alien fleet's energy reactors, causing explosions that rocked the enemy ships and threw them off balance. For a brief moment, humanity seemed to be winning. The tide had turned, and the Council's overwhelming strength began to falter. The larger, slower ships struggled to deal with the nimble human fighters who darted between their massive hulls, striking when least expected. But the Council wasn't finished yet. "We've got company," Lieutenant Rios warned, her voice tense. "There's a massive ship approaching. It's the Council flagship." The Vanguard shook as the new enemy ship entered the fray, its sheer size dwarfing everything in its path. It was a beast of war, covered in armor so thick, it seemed impervious to everything the humans had thrown at it. The flagship's weapons powered up, its energy pulses sending shockwaves through space, tearing apart smaller human ships with each blast. "We need to take that thing down," Hayes said, his voice low but steady. "Rios, coordinate with the rest of the fleet. We can't let it get close." As the flagship loomed closer, the human fleet scattered, trying to dodge its lethal fire. The Council ship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, knocking out several human fighters and sending them spiraling into the void. It seemed like nothing could stop it. The Vanguard took another hit, its shields flickering dangerously. The entire bridge vibrated as the ship rocked from the impact. Hayes gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white. The Vanguard was strong, but even it wasn't invincible. "We're running out of time," Rios said urgently, her eyes glued to the screens. "We can't keep dodging like this. We need a plan." "Then let's make one," Hayes replied, his voice cold and calculating. His mind raced, weighing every option, every risk. There was only one way to do this, one chance to turn the battle in their favor. Lieutenant, order the fighters to pull back. I need all ships to form a defensive line around the vanguard. We're going in. The command was met with confusion at first, but it didn't take long for the human fleet to follow suit. The smaller ships gathered around the vanguard, creating a tight formation that would give the vanguard the cover it needed. Hayes knew what he was asking of his crew. He was asking them to put their lives on the line for one final push. But this was their only chance. Full speed ahead, Hayes ordered, gripping the controls. We're going straight for the flagship. The vanguard surged forward, breaking the defensive line as it shot toward the massive Council flagship. The rest of the human fleet followed in tight formation, providing covering fire, keeping the alien ships at bay as the vanguard closed the distance. The flagship loomed large before them, its weapons charging, ready to destroy anything that came too close. But Hayes had a plan, a risky one. We're going to punch through its defenses, he said, determination in his eyes. All fighters stay close. We need to disable its shields. The fighters fired relentlessly at the flagship, their blasts striking its massive shields, slowly chipping away at the protective layer. The flagship's guns fired back, but now the human fleet was too close. The vanguard closed the gap, its cannons charging for one final strike. Ready, came the shout from the weapons officer, firing now. The vanguard's main cannon fired with all its might, sending a massive energy blast straight into the heart of the flagship. The Council ship's shields shattered under the force, and the blast penetrated deep into its core. The flagship's engine sputtered, sparks flying from its damaged systems. It lurched and groaned, crippled by the human's final strike. "We've done it," Rios shouted, disbelief and triumph in her voice. "The flagship's down." The once unstoppable force of the Council flagship was now a broken wreck drifting in space. The tide had turned, but Hayes knew this victory wouldn't be enough to stop the war. The Council would come again, and humanity would have to fight. But for now, they had won the day. "We're not done yet," Hayes said quietly, staring at the broken flagship, the symbol of the Council's arrogance now floating in ruins. "But today we show the universe that humanity does not kneel." And for the first time, the Council had learned something they hadn't expected. Humanity could never be defeated, not by force, not by threats, and certainly not by control. The battle had shifted. The Council's flagship lay crippled in space, a shattered hulk of metal and energy. For a moment the humans dared to breathe, the weight of their defiance settling in. They had done the impossible, they had fought back. The once unbeatable Council fleet was reeling, their forces scattered and broken. But Hayes knew better than to think this was the end. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Report," Hayes demanded, his voice firm but low, his eyes still locked on the damage reports flashing on his console. Lieutenant Rios's voice came through the comms, steady despite the exhaustion in her tone. "We've taken out the flagship, sir, but there are still several large vessels regrouping. They're not done. We've just put a crack in their armor." "Understood," Hayes said. His face was hard, set in determination. "We hold that crack open. We don't give them the chance to recover." The vanguard shuddered as another barrage of enemy fire struck its shields, but they held just. The Council wasn't finished. If anything, the attack on their flagship had only made them more dangerous, more desperate. Outside, the alien fleet began to reorganize. The remaining Council ships were damaged, but they still vastly outnumbered the humans. There was no denying that the Council was powerful. Their ships were larger, faster, and their weaponry far more advanced. But humanity had something the Council never accounted for: relentless determination. "They're coming in fast," Rios warned, watching the new enemy formation on her screen. "Sir, they're about to hit us with everything they've got." "I know," Hayes muttered, his jaw clenched. "Prepare for the worst. All ships, make your final stand. We're not leaving this battlefield." He knew that even if they held their ground, there would be losses. That was the reality of war. There would be sacrifices, but humanity had already faced impossible odds and come out on top. They had learned to fight with everything they had, to push forward when all seemed lost. Today, they would show the universe that humans would never bow to anyone, no matter how powerful. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the enemy fleet charging toward them, a wall of alien ships cutting through the black expanse of space. Hayes could see the panic in the eyes of the younger officers, but he gave them no time to fear. There was only one thing to do now: fight. "Lieutenant," Hayes said, his voice calm but commanding, "coordinate the last push. We need to buy time for the retreat. Do what you can to break their formation." "Aye, sir," Rios replied, though there was no hiding the weight of the task ahead. Her fingers flew across the console, sending orders to the fighter pilots who had been holding their ground bravely, despite the overwhelming force they faced. The human fleet, battered and bruised, gathered its remaining strength, preparing for the final push. They would not go down without a fight. Each pilot, each soldier knew this might be their last chance, but they didn't hesitate. They had made a choice when they set foot on this battlefield. They would fight to the end. Hayes's voice rang out over the comms. "This is our moment. We stand together, we fight as one. We will not lose." The vanguard surged forward, pushing past the remaining human ships in a flurry of weapons fire. The enemy ships unleashed everything they had, but the human fleet used their speed and maneuverability to outwit the Council's predictable attacks. General Hayes gritted his teeth as enemy fire blasted past the vanguard's shields. The ship shook violently, but it held steady. He knew the humans didn't have the firepower to match the Council's might, but they had something more powerful, a will to survive that could not be broken. "Focus on their engines," Hayes ordered, his eyes locked on the enemy ships. "If we disable their engines, we can slow them down. We need to create a path for the rest of the fleet to retreat." The fighters split off, weaving between enemy ships, dodging deadly blasts as they targeted the vulnerable engines of the Council's remaining vessels. The energy beams from Earth ships hit their mark, one after another, causing alien ships to stutter and stall in their tracks. Despite their technological superiority, the Council ships had a weakness: their arrogance. They underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, to push the limits of what seemed possible. And now, with every blast, they were starting to feel the weight of that mistake. "I'm seeing cracks in their formation," Rio said, her voice gaining strength as she saw their plan come together. "They're starting to falter, sir." Hayes nodded grimly. "Don't let up, we finish this now." The human fleet, though outnumbered and battered, began to gain the upper hand. The Council ships, once so sure of their victory, were beginning to panic. Their formations broke apart, and individual ships began to retreat. It was a victory, but a hollow one. Hayes knew this battle was far from over. The Council would not forget this humiliation. They would return with more ships, more power. But for today, humanity had earned something that no alien force could take from them: the knowledge that they were not weak. They were not helpless. The vanguard pushed through the wreckage of fallen alien ships, moving closer to the remaining Council forces. Hayes's heart raced, not with fear but with the intensity of the battle. He was a warrior, and this was his moment. "This is General Hayes," he said, his voice calm, carrying across the comms to the rest of the fleet. "Hold your positions. We finish what we started. Earth's future depends on us. We will show the universe that humanity will never kneel." The Council ships, now battered and broken, attempted one last desperate assault. But the humans were ready. With one final, devastating attack, they struck the remaining alien ships, sending them into retreat. The remaining Council forces, realizing they were no longer in control, withdrew, leaving behind a field of burning wreckage. Hayes stood on the bridge of the vanguard, his body exhausted but his spirit unbroken. The human fleet had been battered, many lives had been lost, but they had won. They had fought back against the most powerful force in the galaxy and survived. The universe would never forget the day humanity stood tall, the day they turned the tide of war and showed the galaxy that Earth would never bow to anyone. And as Hayes looked out at the debris of the battlefield, a single thought echoed in his mind: we are just getting started. The universe, vast and silent, watched as the remnants of the Council's fleet drifted in the void. It had been hours since the battle had begun, but for General Hayes and the men and women aboard the Vanguard, time felt like a lifetime. The immediate danger was gone, at least for now. The enemy ships that had once overwhelmed them were scattered, retreating back into the dark corners of space. But Hayes knew better than to think the battle was over. The Council had underestimated humanity before. They had thought they could crush Earth's resistance easily, and now they were paying the price. But that didn't mean they would give up. The Council was ancient, powerful, and ruthless. They didn't take defeat lightly. "General, we've got incoming," Lieutenant Rios's voice crackled over the comms. "It's another wave, but this one, it's bigger, a lot bigger." Hayes's heart sank. "How many ships?" "5 fleets, sir," Rios replied. "A combined force of nearly 200 vessels. This is it. They're coming at us with everything they've got." The weight of her words hung in the air. Humanity had fought against overwhelming odds before, but this was different. The Council wasn't just sending another wave of reinforcements. This was a final push, a statement. If humanity wanted to survive, they had to prove that they could do the impossible once more. "Ready the fleet," Hayes ordered, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We don't back down. We've made our stand and we'll make them regret ever thinking they could crush us." The crew on the Vanguard sprang into action, preparing for another battle, one that could decide the fate of humanity. The fear in the air was palpable, but so was something else, a quiet, burning determination. The humans had shown the galaxy what they were made of, but now they would have to do it again. Across the battlefield, the sight of the Council's new fleet was enough to make even the most seasoned soldiers feel a chill. The ships were massive, built for destruction. Their weapons hummed with raw power, their shields gleamed with energy. It was a sight that could break the spirit of any lesser species, but not humanity. Humanity wasn't about to be intimidated. The Vanguard was positioned at the front of the human fleet, and Hayes stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the approaching enemy forces. His mind raced, calculating every possible move. The odds were against them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. But they had something the Council didn't. They had each other. And that was enough. "This is General Hayes," he said, his voice carrying over the fleet's comms. "Today, we've already proven the galaxy is wrong about us. We don't back down no matter the odds. We've fought harder battles than this, and we're going to win this one. We fight for Earth, for freedom, for all of humanity." His words echoed through the ships, and for the first time in hours, there was a renewed sense of purpose among the crew. The humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of their species, and they would not let anyone take that away. The enemy fleet closed in, a wall of metal and energy. The Council's ships didn't hesitate. They fired as one, unleashing a barrage of energy that lit up the blackness of space. The Vanguard shook under the impact, but its shields held. The human fleet responded with everything they had, their cannons lighting up the darkness as they returned fire. The air was filled with the deafening sound of battle, of lasers cutting through space and ships breaking apart. "Brace for impact," Rios shouted as another wave of alien fire hit the fleet. The Vanguard lurched violently, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze. But then Hayes's voice came through the comms, steady and strong. "Keep fighting, we hold this line." As the battle raged, the humans fought with a fury that was unmatched. They weren't just throwing punches. They were hitting back with precision, targeting weak spots in the alien ships, exploiting every opening. Every pilot, every soldier fought as though they had nothing left to lose, because, in a way, they didn't. If they lost this battle, it would be the end. But they had survived this far by defying the odds, and that wasn't going to change now. But even with their bravery, the human fleet was being pushed back. The Council's firepower was overwhelming, and the human ships, though skilled and determined, were struggling to hold their ground. The Council wasn't playing by the same rules anymore. This was their last chance to wipe out humanity's resistance, and they were throwing everything they had into this final assault. "We can't keep this up much longer," Rio said, her voice tight with urgency. "We're losing ships fast." Hayes's eyes scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. They needed a plan, something to turn the tide. The enemy was too powerful, and if they didn't act fast, they would be swallowed whole. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "we're going to hit them where it hurts. Take every fighter we have left and target their command ships. If we can break their leadership, we break their will." Rios hesitated for only a moment before responding. "Understood, sir. I'll coordinate the strike." It was a long shot. The Council's command ships were heavily protected, but it was their only hope. The human fighters broke off from the main line, diving straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Their targets were clear: massive, heavily shielded command ships that directed the flow of the battle. If they could take down those ships, the rest of the fleet would fall apart. The fighters darted between alien ships, weaving through incoming fire, their speed and agility the only things keeping them alive. One by one, the human ships began to score direct hits on the command vessels, disrupting their systems and sending them into chaos. But the alien ships retaliated fiercely, and one by one, human fighters were torn apart in the pursuit. "Stay with them," Hayes shouted into the comms, his heart pounding. "Don't let up." In that moment, the humans had one thing the Council couldn't anticipate. They fought with the desperation of a species that had no choice but to win. And just as the last command ship was hit, a flicker of hope spread across the battlefield. The tide was beginning to turn. The Council had put everything into this final push, and now, with their command structure in disarray, they were starting to crumble. "We've done it," Rio said, breathless. "Their fleet is breaking apart." But Hayes wasn't celebrating yet. They won a battle, but the war was far from over. "We keep pushing," he said, his voice fierce. "We don't stop until they're gone." The humans had proven their strength, and now the universe would know Earth was a force that could never be defeated, not by the Council, not by anyone. The once imposing fleets of the Interstellar Council were now little more than debris scattered across the cold expanse of space. Their ships, once symbols of power and control, now drifted in silence, burning husks of metal and energy. The final remnants of the Council's forces, broken and battered, were retreating faster than the human fleet could pursue. It was over. General Marcus Hayes stood at the command center of the Vanguard, his eyes fixed on the flickering holographic display before him. His face was etched with exhaustion, but his expression was one of quiet triumph. He had seen the horrors of war before, had felt the weight of command, but nothing had ever felt like this. The battle for Earth's survival was not just a victory for humanity, it was a message that would echo across the universe. "Status report," Hayes ordered, his voice low but strong. "Sir," Lieutenant Rios's voice came through the comms, a note of disbelief in her tone. "We've won. The last of the Council's fleet is retreating. We've disabled their engines and most of their remaining ships are in full retreat. We've done it." The words hit Hayes like a wave. He wanted to feel relief, to let the weight of the victory settle in. But the truth was, he knew this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The Council would regroup. They would come back. "Good," Hayes said, forcing his voice to steady. "But we don't stop here. We need to send a message. I want the fleet in position for a final sweep. We can't let them rebuild, not this time." The words felt heavy, but they were necessary. The humans had made it clear that they weren't going to kneel to the Council's will, but that didn't mean the war was over. Not yet. Hayes had learned one hard truth in his life. Victory was only truly won when you could prevent your enemies from rising again. As the fleet moved into position, preparing to chase down the last pockets of Council forces, Hayes felt a sense of finality creeping into his mind. For so long, humanity had been the underdog, the weak, fragile species that didn't belong among the stars. The Council had treated them as an afterthought, but now everything had changed. The balance of power had shifted. The battle outside was fading into the distance, the quiet hum of the Vanguard's engines filling the bridge. Hayes stood before the window, staring out into the vastness of space. For the first time, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt like peace. Humanity had proven itself, and the Council had been forced to acknowledge that. "You did it, General," Rio said softly, her voice full of respect. "You brought us through." Hayes turned to look at her, his face unreadable. He wasn't one for praise. Not when the war was still fresh in his mind, not when there were still so many unknowns. But he nodded once, just enough to acknowledge the truth of her words. "No," he said quietly, "we did it, every one of us." The crew around him, the soldiers, the pilots, the engineers, each one had played their part. Humanity had fought as one, a species united by a single, unshakable will. The Council had never seen it coming. As the final enemy ships vanished into the darkness of space, Hayes allowed himself a moment of reflection. The battle had cost them dearly. There had been losses, so many lives lost in the heat of battle, but the victory was theirs. The message was clear. Humanity would never be a footnote in the history of the galaxy. They would never be weak again. "We've sent a message to the universe," Hayes said, his voice firm. "We've shown them that we will fight for our freedom, and will never stop, not for anyone." Outside, the stars twinkled like silent witnesses to the battle that had changed everything. The Vanguard drifted, its hull scarred but intact, its crew exhausted but proud. It was a quiet moment, a calm after the storm, but Hayes knew better than to think it would last. There were always more battles, always more challenges, but now humanity stood tall among the stars. Suddenly, the communication system buzzed to life. The voice of Commander Emily Torres, leader of the fighter pilots, crackled through. "General, we've got an incoming transmission from the Council's remaining representatives. They want to talk." Hayes's eyebrows furrowed. He knew this would come. The Council might have retreated, but they weren't going to let this defeat slide without trying to salvage something. "Put it through," he ordered. A moment later, the holographic image of Valdrith, the Speaker of the Council, flickered into view. The alien's 6 eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the transmission. His posture was stiff, his expression unreadable. "General Hayes," Valdrith's voice came through, still filled with the cold authority of someone who had never expected to lose. "We wish to offer terms of surrender." The words hung in the air, and Hayes allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The Council had thought they could control the galaxy. They had thought they could bend humanity to their will. But now, they were the ones who had to ask for mercy. "You've lost," Hayes replied, his voice firm and final. "Your fleet is in ruins and your empire is crumbling. The terms are simple: leave our space. Never return. Humanity is no longer under your thumb." Valdrith's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The silence stretched on, and for a moment it seemed like the entire universe was holding its breath. Then finally Valdrith spoke, his voice softer, almost resigned. "You've proven your strength, General Hayes. The Council will respect your terms." The transmission cut off, and the room fell into a heavy silence. The humans had won. The galaxy had just learned that no matter how many times humanity was pushed to the edge, they would never break. The Council had underestimated them once, and they would never make that mistake again. As Hayes looked out into the vastness of space, he felt a sense of peace. Humanity had shown the universe their true power, not through weapons or tactics, but through their unwavering will to survive. The universe would never forget the day humans left the Interstellar Council. and they would remember it for one reason: humanity had won.